So I guess I'll just give a quick background on me and my story. I'm here in Phoenix, Arizona. I lived in Los Angeles for about 20 years, and I was a talent agent for most of that time at a company called the William Morris Agency, and represented A-list celebrities and comedians, and did that for quite a bit of time. And during the subprime crash, my parents, excuse me, who had retired and moved to Florida, they lost about a big percentage of their retirement portfolio. Dad was a plumber, mom was a nurse. They grew up, raised three kids, lower middle class, and did everything their financial advisor told them to, and they got knocked pretty hard. And that was kind of my eye-opening. How the heck does this happen to, folks who worked really hard and raised kids, and most of hardworking Americans? So probably about 2009, after just starting to devour a lot of books and podcasts and audiobooks, I started investing in single family homes in Dallas, Texas. Hindsight being really everything. The homes I bought in Dallas ended up being the perfect time to buy single families. And I did that pretty aggressively in 3 markets through about 2013. Most of that all while I was still working at the agency with a pretty significant salary. So I was able, with friends and family and my own money, to go buy quite a few homes. About 2013, it felt like the single family market was getting harder to pencil out deals on a cash flow basis, and started to look around at other asset classes. I looked at commercial, I looked at apartment buildings, and retail, and a bunch of others. And what was really interesting to me was the affordable housing space, and specifically had a friend who was investing in mobile home parks in the Midwest. So I took a really good look and a deep dive on that asset class, and realized it was a pretty huge opportunity in that space. And so in 2014, started to put the companies together and started acquiring after that. We currently own and operate about 2,500 units in 12 states. It's about 35 communities. When we started, it was a virtual company. So I was in Los Angeles. We had a property manager in Texas. We had someone in a recruiting and HR person in Portland, Oregon. Everyone was kind of spread out. And it was incredibly difficult to manage assets with a virtual company as we were growing really fast. So we decided to open an office in Phoenix, which we did about 3 years ago with my partner, Mike Ayala. So moved here from Los Angeles. Mike and his family moved from Nevada and opened an office, and started to build our core team during that time. We sent everyone home probably about 5 weeks ago to work virtually, which, funny enough, that's how we started as a company. So the transition wasn't that difficult. But as we were growing, we realized in order to have the best possible control of these assets, we needed to build a vertically integrated company. And so we built out a construction company, which I think at its peak maybe had 25, maybe 30 guys, something like that. And they literally just travel and renovate homes, manufactured homes. Then we had the property management company. And in the office in Phoenix, we had the operations team that oversees the regional managers, who oversee the managers and maintenance folks at each property, and full accounting team of 6 or 7, and sales and marketing. In our world, we want our residents to own as many homes as possible. We certainly have renters, but we want to keep that as a lower percentage. And as real estate people, I think we all know that owners treat their property better than renters. So not only will they stay longer, they'll treat the property better, and it's just good for the community for more folks to be owners, and certainly more invested in that property. So we're going on about six years of doing this, and that's kind of the broad strokes and the background of the company.
Unmute myself there. Awesome, sounds good. Yeah, so Hayden and I had some questions for you, so we'll go ahead and jump into that. So, I guess what everybody's, asking, wondering, how are collections going, and how are mobile home parks? I know it's, really, you 2 weeks into it, past April 1st. And so you may not have a full grasp. And then, May is going to be another unknown, but just kind of get your sense of where collections are at and how things are going with you guys.
Yeah, we were expecting. I mean, this has been going on depending on what part of the country you're in for well over 30 days now. So we were expecting May to be down across the board. I think we're about 2 points down, 2% down from where we were April of last year, which really isn't that bad at all. So collections were on pace for April. In general, I think people are expecting that May and June are going to be down. It really depends how long this whole thing's going to last, and when people are going to start getting back to work. And if this is a 4 or 5 month thing, how are those folks going to pay their rent? If the statistics right now are pretty staggering. Through April 4th, there are 16.8 million people out of work from this pandemic. And just to put that in perspective, the job loss during the subprime crash was about 8.7 million during that entire window of that crash. So, again, this is completely unprecedented times, but all of the operators that I know, whether it's multifamily or mobile home parks or anything that's in residential, everyone's just kind of prepping for May and June to be off more than April. But surprisingly enough, April was not a bad month on collections.
Okay. What, just so, because there's some, I'm kind of looking at the list of folks on. So we have, most of the people on are multifamily people. There might be a few people that are in the mobile home park space, but I think for the most part, a lot of people, the mobile home park space, we don't know a whole lot about it, to be honest. And so, what sort of, I know I don't remember how many states, but you're in, quite a few states, and I think you're mainly in the Southeast and Midwest. What sort of jobs do a lot of your tenants have?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, across the board, I think a lot of our residents are probably fall under the essential workers category. The statistic in the U.S. is 50% of wage earners, not household, but wage earners, single wage earners, make $31,000 a year or less. So that's half of the wage earners. Based on, if you're making $31,000 a year and your take home is $24,000, it doesn't really give you very much as far as a housing allowance on a monthly basis. In our world, lot rents are somewhere between about $200 and $350 a month. All in, that we're looking at about $500 to $700 a month for someone to own their own home and pay lot rent. So it's been pretty interesting to see. Just as an example, I wouldn't want to be in the retail space, strip malls. I think there's a big question mark on what's going to happen with self-storage. Obviously, like the Airbnb and travel and luxury. I mean, that's been decimated right now. I had a call with one of our main brokers yesterday, and he basically said that about 60% of the lenders he's working with hit the pause button. CMBS lenders are completely out of the market right now. Other lenders, it's kind of a day-to-day waiting game, which I think is the case with most people. Is every day kind of brings some new challenges. But again, we're in this unprecedented time, so I think everyone's just trying to figure out next steps and how long this is going to end up lasting.
Okay. How are you guys, handling collections? And there's probably, I don't know if you have really any move-ins right now or anything like that, but and then how are you guys handling the maintenance? I know that you try to have people own the homes for the most part, but I assume you probably have at least a few, park-owned homes.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the collection side, what we did, and I think this was a lot of people who are a lot smarter than I, who have been through similar events like this. I think everyone in general, everyone's just kind of hunkering down. They're waiving application fees. They're waiving late fees. If we got ahead of this probably about 30 days ago, really by reaching out to all of our residents and just trying to get a handle on who was still employed. We haven't had any cases of anyone with a coronavirus in our communities yet, but all the testing certainly hasn't been done. So, but as far as collections go, we just really got ahead of it by communicating with those residents. If someone was affected by this and lost a job and they were communicating, we want to work out a deal with them and kind of loosen our eviction policy. There's one school of thought that if you don't have, if you can't pay 1 month, then you probably can't pay 2 months, because again, we're in affordable housing by design. So, but in this time, we really wanted to loosen all of those kind of processes and protocols and say, hey, if you're communicating and you lost your job, we don't want you to leave. We want to work with you. We'll set up a payment plan. We're going to waive all the fees. And so so far that's been working. But I don't think we've seen the full brunt of this yet. And I think May's numbers are going to be interesting across the board. And I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question? I forgot that part.
It was maintenance. I know you guys don't do,
yeah,
but
yeah. So and it goes back to, in general, across the board, all CapEx projects have stopped. Anything that doesn't fall under a health and safety issue or hazard has come to a stop. We sent our construction guys home 30, 40 days ago in case there were travel bans or in case anything out of the ordinary happened. We didn't want them to be stuck somewhere without being around their families. So no one's traveling right now on our side. And really all of I think everyone's just in hunker down mode, meaning make sure your expenses are getting streamlined, and really focused on collections and working with the residents during this time.
Awesome.
Yeah, Adrian actually had a good follow-up question. You may have answered it, but he asked, what are you doing to prevent the tenants from getting together to protest payment? I know this is a big worry on the apartment side. Is that a worry for you on the mobile home park side?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard rumblings of it, and until, if our collections are down 1% or 2%, it's not something that we've had to handle right now, but it could be a problem in May. I think anyone who owns residential real estate right now, and if this thing gets worse, I think everyone's going to be dealing with that on some level. I mean, we haven't had this kind of unemployment in, I don't know the last time, and some folks are saying this is going to get to 25 to 50% unemployment, which is just staggering. If this gets to 50% unemployment, we've all got serious issues. But on the flip side of that, I think that the case for affordable housing is probably the strongest it's ever been. And I don't know if anyone has seen the announcement that Chase made, but Chase is now doing for new single family loans, they're doing 20% down as a minimum, and a minimum of 700 FICO for new buyers. I would expect that the other big banks follow suit in that. But what's interesting is during the subprime crash, 50% of new mobile home park residents were coming from single families. I don't know what the breakdown of owner versus renters. I would guess that it was more renters that were coming from single family into the mobile home park space, but that's a massive number. So if the banks are tightening their lending parameters, then people are looking at either buying a mobile home park or renting an apartment. It doesn't, they don't have that many options left.
Yeah, well, and to your point, I mean, there's, mobile home, especially if you own the home, there's no other, that's the affordable housing solution. I'm not sure there's nothing cheaper than that. So
Yeah, not very much.
Yeah, I mean,
There was a, yeah,
go-
sorry, go ahead, Dustin.
oh, I was going to say, I'm in most of the stuff is in the C space, and, the C class apartments. I mean, we're, eight to $900. If it's all bills paid, then it's $1,000. And that's in DFW. So, your lot rents are $200-300. I mean, it's dirt cheap.
Yeah, there was an article that Forbes put out recently. I'll read an excerpt because I thought this was so interesting. It was on millennials and future housing choices, and the excerpt says, in a post-virus world, we could see a surge in the relatively popularity of single-family homes among renters, whereas in an apartment building where tenants are closer contact by necessity, sometimes packed into elevators to get to their floor, a detached home allows for much easier social distancing. This could accelerate a shift that was already occurring. So it's just very interesting things that you pick up on that all point to the affordable housing space being in higher demand than ever. And actually, one thing I wanted to touch on is in the last 30 days, our applications for renters and owners has probably close to tripled. We're trying to get good data on why that's happened, but that's a really interesting statistic. We've actually had less move outs in general, and the applications coming in have increased. So another kind of data point that's pretty interesting to follow.
That's interesting. I could see how people aren't moving, but for there to be your applications tripling, that's interesting. Yeah, I'll have to follow up with you on that and see what you guys find out.
Yeah.
So you kind of touched on the lending a little bit for you guys, that a lot of people that spigot sounds like it's kind of turned off, and on the multifamily space, CMBS is out the window. I hear different things about bridge lending, so I don't, depends on who you talk to on that, but Fannie and Freddie still lending, but with different requirements and things like that. Are you guys, is it pencils down approach in terms of looking at new deals? Are you guys still evaluating? Like how's your criteria? I know it's probably shifting, day by day and all that, but how, has underwriting shifted for you guys yet, or are you kind of, wait and see approach a little bit?
Yeah, we're still looking at deals. One of the big challenges for putting anything under contract right now is we don't know how long this is going to last. So I had a conversation with a pretty large due diligence company that we used a long while back. We do everything in house, but I wanted to call and kind of get their take on what they were seeing, and no one's flying. They have a few team members in different parts around the country. So if there wasn't an asset within a reasonable driving distance from, I think it was 3 locations, then they weren't going to go on site and do due diligence. So in our case, we own assets in 12 states, just like you had mentioned. Most are in the Midwest down into the Southeast. We're not going to send any of our folks out to do due diligence right now on something. And it sounds like a lot of the other companies that are specific to due diligence are doing the same. So I guess one approach that folks might have is, well, we're going to make LOIs and we're going to try to get stuff under contract, and we're just going to try to push it out to a 6-month closing or a 8-month or a 4-month or something like that, unless they're not doing on-site due diligence, which I'm not quite sure how that works. So it's really, for us, it's a day by day. I'm definitely have looked at a couple deals in the past week. I think our deal analysis is less than it is because we're really focused on protecting the assets and our investors, and really focused on streamlining expenses and focused on income. So I hope that changes and we can start to get back to acquisitions. But I think, at least in my mind, that the due diligence part of it is probably the big question mark. If you're in California and you buy something in Idaho, who's going to go due diligence there? I mean, maybe you've got a team in Idaho that can safely drive and social distance and everything, but I just don't know that part.
Gotcha. I think you kind of alluded to this previously, but what does the mobile home park industry look like, 5, 10, 15 years from now?
Well, I think in general, when there's no longer a demand for affordable housing, then our business is probably no longer a good model. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. I mean, you hear about the middle class compression, the middle class getting smaller, and it's because I don't think that the upper class is getting that much bigger. I think it's quite the opposite. You look at the trends of, I tell the story all the time. My dad's father, my grandfather, I'm almost 47 years old. When in that generation, they grew up and they had one salary, they raised 3 kids, lower middle class, they put them through school, they owned a home, they had a car. That's out the window now. It's not uncommon for our residents to have 4 jobs just from mom and dad, if mom and dad are even still together. And simply put, it's salaries have not kept up with expenses over the years, over the last 30, 40, 50 years, however long you want to go back. So the lower class is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I don't really see that changing. I mean, maybe that flattens out over time and stops expanding, but I honestly don't, at least in my lifetime, I don't see that changing.
Are you seeing a growth in development of parks, or is that kind of, flatlined?
Well, not many communities get built in general, and part of that is municipalities not wanting them in their backyard as much as America needs affordable housing, and we need it more than ever right now. It's not very many communities that are getting developed, and part of it is because it takes a long time. If you think about, well, I'm going to buy a parcel of land, assuming you jump up through all the hoops and permits and all the zoning and everything like that, and you buy a big parcel of land somewhere, and you're going to build a 75 space community. It's going to take a while to build that out, and then you've got homes coming in. Are you selling those homes or renting those homes? Any given market has an absorption rate, right? So if you're in a hot market and you plunk down 30 brand new homes in an area, maybe you're going to sell 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 a month. That's pretty aggressive. So by the time it's all said and done with new development and everything else, I mean, it could be 3 or 4 or 5 years before that's stabilized and cash flowing. So it's something that we've talked about, but we're not really there as far as pulling the trigger on a development. We do have some properties that have extra land that we could potentially start to develop, but I think that's a little bit down the line.
Gotcha.
Do you have certain demographics that you guys look for when evaluating a mobile home park? Is it, is there a certain threshold for income for the area, or distance from, a Walmart, or distance from a metro, or, size of town? Can you kind of go over some of your metrics?
Yeah, sure. So we're definitely, by design, we're in secondary and tertiary markets. So we don't need a big, massive MSA to go in, but we definitely need that market to not be a mom and pop or a one-horse town. So meaning, a meat packing plant or whatever the largest employer is, you have to really look at that stuff. We're absolutely looking at where the Walmarts are, where the Amazon fulfillments are, where the Costco's, and kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier. It's anywhere that someone makes less than $30,000 a year. It's restaurants, it's gas stations, it's all these supporting businesses in addition to the Costco's and the Walmarts and stuff like that. So we definitely, that's one of the first things we do as part of our desktop due diligence, is we look at the market, and is the market on the rise? Is it flat? Is it in decline? Where are the big job drivers? And so part of that, you're trying to get kind of taking a lot of data points and get to a back of the napkin. This is a good market. This is an okay market, whatever the conclusion is. But you also have to keep in mind that this is also affordable housing. And until people, we don't know which direction, what does America look like in 100 years? Is everyone clustered more around big cities? Has everyone gone away from big cities? And it's so hard to tell. Has Amazon taken over and only people work at Amazon? Honestly, it's just really hard to tell that exactly what's going to happen. But and it goes back to affordable housing. I think there's, I won't say always, but I think at least my lifetime, there's going to be a pretty strong demand for it.
Are these parks, are they generally operated by mom and pops, or is it, are there big players in the space, or what does that look like?
So are you asking in general or the ones that we've acquired?
In general, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a little bit of both. I mean, we've purchased communities literally from folks that one woman who built one in the 70s. It was a park in Ohio we built. We purchased rather. We've bought from other operators. There's huge operators in the space that are publicly traded companies with north of 100,000 lots or units. There was an interesting thing I heard on, so there's a company called UMH Properties, and it's a REIT. They own about 23,000 sites. And this is as of about 5 weeks ago. On their end, they said there was no decline or sales, no decline in sales or unemployment. And this is as of March 6th. So actually it's about, getting almost 6 weeks ago. But so lots of, all over the board, there's big players, there's smaller players. When we're looking at deals, because we've closed on 35 deals, we get first looks from brokers that we've built relationships over the years. We did some direct mail with, okay results. So it's either stuff that's off market, it's broker relationships. That's probably the biggest, the two biggest ways that we're finding deals.
And do you guys see, it's probably way too early, but do you guys see is there any opportunities that you think will come out of the COVID-19 for you guys in terms of, I don't know if some of them were in trouble and maybe they're more in trouble, or, just any opportunities that you might see going forward. Of course, we don't know how long this is going to go and all that. So the longer it goes, the more potential opportunities. But
yeah. Well, I think we're going to see, I think we're going to continue to see a rise in applications coming in each month. I think our space is fairly resilient. We don't know what this is going to turn into, to your point, if this is a year, or if this is another 2 months, we just don't know. I think the other thing that we're seeing, which is interesting, is newer operators that come into the space that may not have a team built out are buying these communities. And, we kind of have this running joke with some of the brokers that we're going to see them back on the market in 10 or 12 months because, they're like, well, how the heck do we manage these things? And they're not easy assets to manage. I think anything in affordable housing can be a challenge, and that's why you really can't subcontract, and a lot of the times you can't third party a lot of stuff out. So I think we're going to see an opportunity in new deals that are coming onto the market. If we have a housing crash from this, we'll certainly, another great buying opportunity. And then I think in general, I think our tenant base is probably going to grow, and more people downsizing. It's like if you're a family of 5, dad loses his job, mom hasn't been working, you're in a 5-bedroom house. You're probably not homeless, but maybe you downsize to an apartment, or maybe you downsize into a manufactured home or something that isn't the same cost or rent of a 5 or 6 bedroom house. And where we sit really towards the bottom of the economic ladder, right? I mean, we're really below us. There's not many places to go. If a resident gets into trouble, we can't work out a deal with them. And aside from this crisis we're in, if a resident gets in trouble and they can't work out a deal, they're living with family, they're living in their car, maybe they're homeless. So we're really, by design, we're towards the bottom of the economic ladder.
Arvin had a good question too. Do you see the tiny home trend growing, or do you think that's more of like a fad that will kind of come and go?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let me ask you a question. What do you think the median or the average price of a tiny home is, like, roughly?
30,000.
Wow, that's pretty expensive. I thought I saw, and I'm far from an expert, but I saw something. I thought they were more in the $60,000 to $100,000 range, and that may be way out the window. I think, and again, I'm not an expert on tiny homes. I think that trend is really people looking to making a decision to downsize, not because they really need to be in affordable housing. You know, we'll buy a community. Let's say we buy a 100-space community and it's 50% occupied. That means we have 50 lots that are non-performing. It could be 10, 20, 30, 40 homes that need to be demoed or renovated, and we send our guys in, our construction company, and they'll renovate a home. And let's say it's a 20-year-old 3-bedroom 2-bath home. We can do that for maybe $15,000. If we go and get a contractor or subcontract that out, it's almost double. So we spend 15 grand. We sell that home for $20,000, which is a really great price point. You know, that's someone putting $3,000 or $4,000 down on a home and keeping those all in payments to $500 or $600 or $700 to own a home and the lot rent, whatever that ends up being, depending on the cost. And just for perspective, the bringing in a brand new home to in our communities and our price points are around $40,000. So that's twice the amount. So I think if tiny homes were 20 grand and there was financing, like is there financing on tiny homes? I actually don't know that. If they're in a reasonable price point, and there was financing, that I think that might be an interesting alternative, but I think it's more people that are choosing to downsize and not, you know, that really have a choice to downsize. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. Yeah, I totally get it.
Yeah, and if anyone knows what tiny homes range from, I'm sure it's a range, but, you know, throw that in the comments. I'd be curious. But I think when I looked into it, I had the same idea years ago. And whether it's a trend or not, you know, it's interesting.
Then part of Arvin's question was, have you guys, is anybody converting mobile home parks into tiny home parks, or have you guys looked at that?
Say that one more time.
Oh, have you seen, and maybe I missed it, but have you guys seen anyone converting mobile home parks to tiny home parks?
I haven't. So Sam Zell he's one of the biggest players in the space, and they have tiny home communities. And again, kind of going back to what we were talking about a minute ago, I think it's a different demographic.
Okay.
And I think the price points are more expensive than what we're looking at.
Okay.
Yeah. So Arvin said 10K to over 100K for tiny homes. Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, look, if you've got a $10,000 tiny home, well, let's back up. Most of America, they don't really have any savings, and it goes back to the 50% of wage earners making $31,000 or less. Most just don't. You know, the down payments are one of our biggest challenges. For a $4,000 down payment is always going to be a challenge in our space. So, somewhat, I doubt if the homes are $10,000, and we're talking about the tiny homes, I don't know how many folks that are making less than $30,000 a year have 10 grand in the bank, plus, you know, closing costs and things like that.
Okay. I wanted to make sure Ajit's question got answered. So what are the better options, city sewage, septic, or lagoon? Have you guys experienced all three?
Yeah, we have, and they're different. I mean, one, you know, there are people who are out buying that are only looking for certain things. If it doesn't check box A, B, and C, then we're not going to acquire it. What we found is if you can solve more problems, then you're probably going to pick something up at a better deal. So we have all three. Sometimes there's challenges, but that's all part of due diligence. And you literally would pencil it out and say, hey, what's going to happen in 10 years with this wastewater, treatment plant or a lagoon or whatever. And the math is going to tell you what to do sometimes. And again, if you're buying, there are folks out there that are buying just stabilized communities, 100 spaces or more, and major MSAs of 100,000, or MSAs of 100,000 and up. And guess what? They're going to be paying, they're going to be buying stuff at much lower cap rates. And that's their model, and that's great. But I think in our world, the more problems you can solve that fit your budget and projections, then the more opportunities that you have.
Awesome.
Ajit actually had another good question. What's the typical ratio in terms of operating expenses to NOI, and what's your typical break-even point for mobile home parks?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about like expenses in general. When you've got a community that's, let's just say, sub 50%, you're probably not breaking even, and your expense ratio is probably higher than a stabilized community at, let's say, 70 or 80 or 90 or 90%, depending on what stabilized is. Stabilized could mean cash flowing, or it could just simply mean breaking even. So you could have a community at 50% occupancy that's not breaking even yet, that could have a 65% expense ratio. And then your expenses don't, if you've got these operating expenses, and let's say it's manager and maintenance and everything else, like those don't necessarily get lower with occupancy, but your income does increase, right? And obviously the big three value adds in our space is you're picking up something at a low occupancy, and so that's just infill, right? We're going to take this from 50 to 89% in the next 4 years, whatever. Or you've got rents below market. Maybe it should be $300 a month, and you're at $225. And then you have utility bill back, where we've purchased properties where the residents were paying $0 towards utilities. And so you're like, why is that water bill so high this month? Well, 3 people have been running their hose for the last 4 days because they have no concept of a water bill, right? So between utilities and between raising lot rents, you have to be very thoughtful and conservative, because going from $225 or another $100 a month, you really have to do that over several years, especially if you're starting to pass back utilities.
Okay. Mary had a question. Do you need proper zoning for RVs to park in mobile home parks?
It's a good question. I don't know about the zoning. We're not in the RV business. We might have a couple pads. It's a different size pad. I know it's kind of a different setup. I can't answer that, but I know that just in general, being in the RV business wasn't something that we were really interested in. I think it feels very seasonal depending on where it is. And I wonder how many people who are under, 35 are buying RVs. I don't think it's very many. I think that was really at least it feels like that was more of a baby boomer thing, but just my 2 cents, but we're not really in the RV business.
Okay.
Yeah, Lewis had a good question too for mobile home parks. I think we touched on this earlier, but in case for some people that came in late, do you find collection rates to be lower versus multifamily? And then what is your exit strategy for mobile home parks? And then also, do you just own the land, or do you own both the land and mobile home parks units themselves?
Yep. So let's just take a look here. Yeah, I think if you're going to compare, first thing is probably comparing affordable housing to, let's say, A-class housing. I think you're going to have a lower collections rate in general. I spoke to someone who owns a pretty large portfolio of manufactured homes that are nicer. It's a nicer property, so I don't know what that means. Maybe lot rents are $600 or $700 a month. I think that their collections in March or April rather were 89, and they were only off a point or something like that from last year. So that's interesting to see. let me see. And as far as the exit goes, our model is really buying value add properties and then holding them for as long as possible, because it's just an enormous amount of work that goes into turning these around. I mean, imagine a 100-space mobile home community, and imagine 15 years ago it was at 90% occupancy, and the owner, who was 74 years old, passed away. It was passed on to their daughter. The daughter didn't really want to run this park, but ended up doing it. And 15 years later, the park's at 42% occupancy, and there's drugs, and there's just all kinds of stuff that happened over that. You know, those declines take some time. It's not an overnight, you know, you're not in this great market and you walk out the door the next day and all of a sudden the market's in the tank. It's like those things take a long time. So for us, we want to buy these. We want to turn them around. We want to give our residents safe, affordable housing and hold them for as long as possible. And it could be until the market cycle is really at the top where it's the best time to sell. It just kind of depends on how we structure the deal. So there's a couple ways to do it. And then the question on land or both land. Yeah. So it's different. I mean, and it goes back to solving problems. If you've got, we've purchased communities where there's a very high percentage of park-owned homes, which just simply means the resident is making a rent payment and they're making a lot rent payment, right? They're making a rent payment for the home. Let's say it's $350 and they're making a $250 payment towards the lot rent. In our world, we want to convert as many of those to owners. A few things happen. One is that it goes back to the pride of ownership. They're going to stay in the community longer. And also the expense ratio is going to go down on that home. If they own their home and something happens, the stove, a sink is clogged, whatever that's within that home itself, that's on them to make those repairs. If we own those homes, then we have to make those repairs. So we absolutely have both. Long term, we want that rental or that park owned home percentage to be as low as possible and really be in the land business versus focusing on rentals.
Okay. I'm looking at, so I know Lewis had a question about, do you look at deals with private or public utilities in terms of sewage treatment, but it sounded like you're in the problem solving business. And so if it makes sense and the numbers make sense, then you'll, perhaps move forward. So hopefully that is answered. And Lewis, if that doesn't quite answer it, then feel free to, add some other questions. But one thing I wanted to, if you could touch on, what's the average length so if someone brings in a home, how long does that home stay, and what does it cost to move a home, and and why do people own the homes? Obviously it's their home, but I guess touch on, can they just pick it up and pick it up and go somewhere else if they, anyways, if you could kind of touch on all that, because I don't think we've talked about that.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess the first thing, depending on the area of the country, I'll just give a range. I think it's probably about let's just say $4,000 to $7,000 to move those homes. So the first thing is going back to affordable housing and what these folks are making and what they have in savings. Let's give one scenario. So let's say someone has a year lease on, because we own the land and they're all leases, right? So if someone has a year lease, it's they've been a great resident, whether they brought in a home to the park and they moved it themselves. Very infrequently does that happen, but let's assume that they own their home outright. They're not making payments on it. And the 12-month lease is done and they want to pick up and move. They can absolutely move that home out of the park. What happens most of the time is someone moves into the community and they run into some sort of hardship, whether it's medical or a massive car accident or something that kind of throws them into a tailspin. They're making payments on that home. They're making payments on their lot. And if unfortunately we have to evict someone, then we have to take that home back and we literally go and remarket that home to someone new. So as long as someone's not in a lease and they're making payments, and another scenario is they've been making payments on their lot lease and they've been making payments on their home, like whether that's to a Berkshire company or whoever that is, and they can now their lot lease is up for renewal. They can absolutely move that home if they're paying for it, as long as they're making all of their payments to whoever that may be, the third party who does the whoever's holding the note on that home.
Okay. What sort of eviction rates do you see if they own the home, and how many, how often do you see people moving homes?
Almost never. I mean, I'd have to really think about how often people are moving. I'm trying to think if I can even think of one or two, which I don't think I can. So honestly, once the home is set there, it's generally there for the life of it. I mean, it's got to be in the 90s as far as the percentage go. I mean, it's just too much to move it. If we're having a hard time in affordable housing and residents are having a hard time coming up with $4,000 for a down payment and they're in a financial tailspin, chances are they don't have $6,000 to move a home.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, what do evictions look like right now for mobile home parks? For multifamily, they've suspended all evictions. Does that apply to mobile home parks too?
Yeah, I don't know if it's the exact same rules, but we're definitely, it goes back to kind of the beginning of the conversation. We want to keep everyone there. So as long as, and part of this is a state by state, aside from the crisis we're in, but we really want to keep everyone in the community and work something out. And again, our collections are not that off from last April. So hard to say what May is going to look like, but right now we don't really have to, we don't have to worry about that today, but next month is a different month.
A question from Arvin is, would it be more secure to have owners that choose to downsize? Which I'd be curious if you have that class of folks, or do you typically have more of the paycheck to paycheck type?
I didn't follow that. Can you ask that question maybe a different way?
Would it be better for you guys to choose people that are financially independent and choosing to downsize, or would it be better for you guys to go, or I guess I'm phrasing this terribly. Would it be better to have the people that are looking to downsize that are financially independent versus the paycheck to paycheck folks?
I don't know if there's a single person in affordable housing that's financially independent. So
Yeah.
I may be reading this totally the wrong way, but
Right.
I think that someone who's looking to downsize into a tiny home is a different demographic than someone who makes $22,000 a year at a Walmart, right? And that's what that's what they can afford.
Yep. And then Jenny had, she said I think we touched on this a little bit. Is it really tough to get permits in order to develop a mobile home park?
Yeah, in general, and we covered this a little bit. It's municipalities, as much as America needs affordable housing, some municipalities don't want it in their backyard. So some make it difficult. It just depends, but there's two parts of it. One is if you're going to do a brand new ground up development of a mobile home park, if you're gonna build a 4-space park, great, maybe you get that done in a year or something like that. If you're going to build a 100-space park, it's a lot of time to bring in, new and used units and infill. And there's only so many people that will buy a home in any given market in any given month. And obviously it's cyclical during the season, meaning not many people are moving during December or January versus summertime when kids are out of school and that's a good time to move. So I think it is in general difficult. There's not very many parks being built each year though.
And is there, because I've been to mobile home university or whatever it was called. And I thought I remember Frank talking about how cities in general aren't big fans of mobile home parks because they don't pay a whole lot in taxes. Is there is that have you heard that before? Does that sound right? Is that also some pushback for not, not wanting development of mobile home parks?
It's probably a city to city or a state thing, just depending on what
Yeah.
taxes are. I mean, it hasn't been anything that we've
Okay.
really factored in. Yeah.
Okay.
And then we got another question on your past deals. What is the average passive investor returns been as far as like cash on cash, equity multiples, IRR, and so forth?
Yeah, every deal is different, but if you've got something and you're buying at a pretty decent cap rate, I mean, it honestly depends. We've bought deals in cash. We've had CMBS loan. We've had seller financing. We've had bridge financing. We've had that middle tier financing. I think in right now where we sit for a deal to get to 12, 14, 15% total project cash on cash return once it's stabilized. That's probably starting to push the limits. 5 years ago, it was a lot. It was probably a lot higher. Cap rates were certainly a lot higher 5 or 6 years ago. So kind of just depends on the deal. I think if we're looking at something that can push a mid-teens IRR, maybe a high teens IRR, that's pretty solid. Where we sit right now, there's what's felt like a feeding frenzy of brand new operators or folks raising capital coming into the market. And so things are getting snatched up at much lower cap rates. And that kind of goes back to the broker conversation that we're starting to see these properties pop back on the market 10 or 12 months later because people get into them and they realize, well, I have no idea how to manage this. And I thought I could hire a third-party property management company and it's really, really difficult. So, and every deal is different too, right? Everything, there's a lot of moving pieces, whether your residents are, and I'm just comparing to, let's say multifamily, whether residents are paying for utilities or whether there's financing on their homes, or it's just a lot of different moving pieces.
What sort of cap rates do you guys look at in the mobile home parks? I know just underwriting multifamily deals, we've seen anywhere from A to C class properties, all kind of the cap rates on top of each other, right around that 5% mark. So what are you seeing in the or the mobile home park space?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I saw a package maybe 6 months ago that I think it was Marcus and Millichap put out for a secondary market in Alabama. It was at a 4 cap. I don't know what it sold for. And we've bought parks at 12 and 13 caps years ago. Now probably 6 and 7s and maybe an 8 if it's an off market mom and pop deal, maybe. But we've seen cap rate compression just like everyone else has. We're just, I think, at the tail end of it. 10 years ago, a lot of people weren't talking about mobile home parks and manufactured housing, and just by a lot of people looking for yield and having a hard time finding it, then there are more people in the space. We go to all the big conferences every year, and probably the last 3 years we've seen more hedge funds and Wall Street presence at those conferences. So it's been pretty interesting to see.
Are you guys involved in any of your mobile home parks 55 and up? And
Nope.
Okay.
None.
Yeah. Any can you touch on any pros or cons of the 55 and up parks?
We not really, but just because we don't own them. I know that my grandparents retired into a mobile home community in Clearwater, Florida. They passed away probably 20 years ago, maybe even longer. I think that their lot rent in Clearwater, Florida, 20 some odd years ago was $800 a month. So 55 plus community, you probably have some amenities. Maybe you have a pool and a clubhouse, and I mean, maybe there's some 55 plus communities that are more in the affordable housing side, but it's not really part of our business. So not really sure. In our communities, I mean, it's affordable housing. So it's
Yeah.
We don't have a single pool in our communities because that's not our demographic, right?
Yeah. Let's see. What's your typical time frame for getting an empty lot filled with either a new or refurbished home? And I guess she's kind of Mary's kind of touching on in multifamily, if we're 50% occupied, but leasing's it's leasing versus you're selling, so it's a lot different. But if you're I guess what's that time frame if you're not well occupied? I think you were saying 5 a month was on the more aggressive
Very
side.
aggressive, very aggressive. I'd say, and it all depends on the market.
Sure.
I would say that you're looking at probably 8 to 10 units a year, something like that, to sell. If you're going to rent units, you would certainly move more units. So it just depends on what your model is.
Okay, gotcha. Let's see. And then Lewis had a question as far as you touched out on financing now, and I guess you touched on a little bit of your financing in the past as well. So you've had some CMBS, you've had some all cash, probably maybe some seller financing in there as well.
Quite a bit of seller financing, yeah.
Okay, quite a bit, and then bank.
Well, think of it this way: if you're selling a community at 50% occupied,
Yep.
first of all, you're not going to get conventional financing. It just
Yep.
really doesn't exist. So your options are cash, a bridge loan, or seller financing. If you're the owner of that park trying to sell that 50% occupied park, and they're having a hard time because it's less buyers that are chasing that, a lot of times they'll incentivize by carrying a note for some period of time. And actually the seller financing, just off the cuff, I mean, probably 4 to 6% and varying, amortizations and terms and everything. But the rates are in general not bad on seller financing, and a heck of a lot easier on a closing too.
Well, it's probably a better situation for them too, because they're used to probably getting a certain amount of cash flow, and so they're getting some cash flow from this as well, and their capital gains hits kind of spread out over time a little bit too. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's usually not a young seller we're buying from, right? So it's absolutely part of their retirement.
Yeah.
David had a good question too, about do stabilized properties, because multifamily can qualify for non-recourse. Is that the same in mobile home park communities too?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. I mean, we had a CMBS loan. I want to say it was 4.5% or something like that, with maybe a 30-year AM. So it depends on it just depends on the borrower's profile, depends on the community, how stabilized. Is it a 5-star community with, in Malibu with, $1 million purchase price, or is this in a tertiary market with, $225 lot rents? I mean, it's a range, but there's definitely non-recourse availability. Well, there was until we get through this.
Right. And then Patty had the question of, do your parks fall under any sort of rent control? She does, I guess mobile home appraisals in California. So, and she finds all parks I've appraised in units are under rent control.
Yeah, we don't buy in those states.
Yeah. Okay. Any other, we're bumping up to that hour. Any other questions for Andrew? Okay.
Another pretty interesting point. Ken McElroy is a good friend of mine, had put out something the other day, and he was saying that banks are expecting about 30% default right now, which is really pretty fascinating. So, goes back to the beginning. We're in such unprecedented times right now, and no one has been through this. Certainly people who have been in the business for a long time, who have been through different recessions and corrections and things like that. But yeah, certainly pretty wild times. And I think every day we're just trying to stay ahead of it and get as much information as we can and protect the assets and the residents and investors. And every day seems to be a new adventure.
But the defaults are only going to be temporary, right? I mean, they're planning on the fact that we're going to come back in about 2 months, so that people keep their properties.
That's the hope. I mean, hopefully in a couple months this is all in the past and we have the light is at the end of the tunnel. I don't know. My crystal ball is broken right now, but I'm hoping we get through this.
Well, I figured they'd do a forbearance on these,
yeah.
And then they suggest that the amount would just be put on the back end of the loan.
Sure.
And either put interest or forgiven or whatever the interest would be. So they're going to, I think, personally, what I've seen so far, and I'm not an expert at all this, I think everybody's hit that glitch, and I think they're making accommodations because they don't want the properties back.
Well, so hang on. So let me be clear, because I don't know the breakdown of that 30%, but it was a 30% default on mortgages. So that could be a single family property, or that could be a note on a strip mall that is out of business, or it's what's the big restaurant chain that said they're not paying their rent? Cheesecake Factory, right? Maybe that's a forbearance, or maybe they go into bankruptcy. Like we don't know. Like what I'm guessing is there's going to be quite a big percentage of businesses that don't come back from this, and that's the default rate. And then quite a big percentage of companies that are really just pushing, taking 90 days and doing a forbearance on their loan. So I think there's going to be a combination of both.
Gotcha. Okay.
Then Mary had the question of, and you touched on it a little bit. Do you guys have anything in the pipeline? Sounds like you're still evaluating deals, but
yeah, we're looking at some deals, and again, it kind of goes back to how are you going to do due diligence on deals if very few people are flying and you don't want to send your. We're not going to send our team out to go due diligence on anything right now, and I think that's probably what most people, including big due diligence companies, are saying. So, I live in Phoenix. Phoenix is not a cheap market. If there were great deals in our backyard and our team was here, yeah, we'd go find some deals. But Phoenix feels very overpriced right now in general to buy, and so makes sense that I just don't know how folks are going to do due diligence, on-site due diligence. For stuff they're getting under contract if this thing, goes another 6 months. And again, we just don't know how long this is going to last. We hope in a couple months it's all behind us.
And I think you touched on this a little bit. Jeet had the question of what's the average, I think he's talking about income expense ratio for a well-operated park.
It depends on whether it's park-owned homes or rentals. I mean, I would say, maybe as low as 25%, something like that. And that's probably really lean and mean. And that's if there's no expenses on the homes. It just depends. I mean, every deal is so unique. It's a very different asset class than multifamily or any other, where you have simply rent income and you have, we have folks that own their homes. We have parks that we own a lot of the homes in that we're paying for expenses. So all that stuff factors in. So just kind of depends.
Gotcha. Well, we definitely want to be respectful of everybody's time, and we appreciate everybody joining in. Andrew, if you don't mind sharing how people can reach out to you and learn more about you and what you're up to.
Yeah, sure. So Four Peaks partners.com is our main website, and I would expect that we'll probably continue to do some updates like this as we're just kind of working through all this stuff. So anyone can go to the site and sign up to get on our our newsletter, and then obviously reach out to you guys too if anyone wanted to have a call at some point.
Awesome. Well, yeah, appreciate your time, Andrew. You guys be safe, and appreciate everybody for hopping on the call. Lots of good folks. So yeah, appreciate everything.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe out there.
All right, take care. See you guys.
Guys.